beating back ISIS. Iraqi forces claim they've retaken control of the city of Ramadi from ISIS terrorists. Deadly weather. Tornadoes take lives. Now floods and winter storms plague nearly a dozen states. Compassion for Cubans. Pope Francis implores Central Americans to welcome Cuban exiles. And billion-dollar flick. The new Star Wars movie breaks box office records. Those stories and more on EWTN News Nightly for Monday, December 28, 2015. Good evening and Merry Christmas. After all, it is a season. I'm Brian Patrick with your news now. Well, the terrorist effort to establish an Islamic State takes a step backward. Iraqi forces push ISIS out of the center of the city of Ramadi. Jason Calvi is here with that story. Jason?
Brian, a Pentagon spokesman in Baghdad says taking back a government center in Ramadi is a significant accomplishment. Secretary of State John Kerry congratulated Iraqi forces for perseverance and courage. And Iraq's prime minister says 2016 will mark his country's final victory against ISIS. The black flag of ISIS cast a shadow over Ramadi since May. The city is the provincial capital in the western Anbar province. Iraqi forces fought to retake it for months. Now they made a major move forward. The Iraqi flag flies today at Ramadi's main government complex.
It's an impressive military accomplishment. Urban fighting is tough, and with ISIS willing to do suicide bombers and use civilian as cover, snipers and the like. It was a tough fight, but they succeeded.
Gary Schmidt, a former President Reagan advisor, says the loss of Ramadi can hurt ISIS's recruitment.
One of the appeals is look very successful. It's one thing for young men and women to move to Syria or Iraq and when they have a sense that they're joining a movement that's going to be successful. It's another thing when the narrative turns negative, as it has in some places for ISIS.
And while this Iraqi army spokesman said earlier today that Ramadi was liberated, Iraq's head of military operations in Anbar says ISIS fighters still control 30% of the city. Now, rubble in Ramadi reminds us of the city torn apart by war. And the question now is, how are Iraqi forces going to hold on to Ramadi, reconstruct the city, and heal political wounds? Ramadi is predominantly Sunni, where distrust of the Shiite-led Iraqi government runs deep. So, Brian, many problems still remain.
Jason Calvi, thank you. And here in the United States, severe storms sweep across the U.S., leaving a path of damage. Winter weather is now blanketing areas from the Midwest to the Deep South, and spring-like tornadoes turn deadly in Texas. Only when lightning flashed in the darkness could you see the tornado in the distance. You can see the damage easily now after one of the tornadoes hit Copeville, Texas, sending this home into the air.
It was pretty traumatic. We just came out to assess our own damages, and he's over there yelling for help.
We realized that he was running across the road with his baby.
Deborah Lee King's neighbor begged her to take his newborn child to the hospital. She did, while her husband, Glenn, helped to try to get the man's wife out of what was left of their home.
She was pinned in there between a wall and the door.
She survived. Her baby did not. A tornado destroyed an elementary school in Red Oak, while just a few blocks away, Willard Jordan and his family cowered inside a closet.
That sound, I just can't get that sound out of my head.
Around the Dallas area, the damage ranges from light to devastating. 8 of the reported deaths happened in Garland, which the National Weather Service now says was hit by an EF4 tornado. Donations of warm clothing, food, and other necessities keep coming in to storm shelters in that area. Meanwhile, heavy rain leaves some neighborhoods in Louisville, Kentucky underwater. Streets there in many places impassable. Crews put up barricades near Churchill Downs where many of the underpasses are prone to flooding. Nearby rivers are beginning to overflow as well. Nearly a dozen states also cope with a major snowstorm, and it stretches south of the U.S. border into northern Mexico. The government there declaring a state of emergency in more than 60 towns. Travel has become virtually impossible. And a developing story, a Cleveland police officer will not be charged for killing 12-year-old Tamir Rice. A grand jury refusing to indict rookie officer Timothy Lohman. The prosecutor calls this a perfect storm of human error, but not criminal. He said there was no way for officers to know that the gun the boy was carrying was not real. Meanwhile, the Chicago Police Department facing more criticism tonight. About 100 people gathered Sunday protesting the latest police shooting. Jesse Jackson joining the crowd outside 55-year-old Betty Jones' home. Officers say they accidentally shot and killed her while confronting a 19-year-old domestic violence suspect. He was also killed by police.
We have our fair share of problems, be it police problems, crime and poverty. But I just feel like right now is not a time for hatred. Right now is not a time for throwing stones at people. Right now is an opportunity for us to get past this difficult time together.
Police say the officer who fired the shots is on administrative duty pending an investigation. The U.S. Justice Department is investigating for possible civil rights or other violations. The childhood home of former President Bill Clinton remains closed today after a suspected arson fire on Christmas. A person driving by the Hope, Arkansas home first spotted the fire Friday morning. It caused about $20,000 in damage to the home. Detectives say they could smell an accelerant, but they're not saying anything else about their investigation. We are also following the road to the White House tonight. Republican presidential candidate Ted Cruz meets with about 3,000 Christian leaders in Texas this week. This is the same group of evangelicals that helped Cruz in his run for the U.S. Senate. And Jeb Bush takes shots at Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump on the campaign trail. He is currently trailing the frontrunners. Other stories our EWTN News Nightly team is covering in today's world. China embarks on new guidelines for family size. Political leaders just voted to replace the country's one-child policy with a new two-child policy. China is concerned about its aging population. The government there says in just 15 years, China will be home to more than 400 million people over the age of 60. There's deep concern there won't be enough young people to support them. Analysts say the revised family limitations will continue to lead to more abortions in China. A Washington Post reporter imprisoned in Iran is allowed some family time for Christmas. Jason Rezaian's mother says family members visited him for several hours on Friday. Iran jailed him last July, later convicting him of espionage. The Post denies those allegations. It is still unclear how long he'll be locked up. Analysts believe Iran is using him as a bargaining chip with the U.S. Some Christian refugees from Iraq celebrate Christmas in Turkey. They had to flee their homeland to avoid persecution by ISIS. They celebrated the birth of Jesus thousands of miles from their family and friends.
It's sad to be far away from our neighbors, from our friends, from our families. It's not easy.
The Iraqi Christians sang carols in an old wedding hall that was converted to a church for the Christmas celebration. Pope Francis calls for more generosity for Cuban migrants stuck in Central America. The Pope says many Cubans are victims of human trafficking. 8,000 have been stranded in Costa Rica since mid-November. That's when Nicaragua stopped them from crossing its borders. The Pope made the plea for Cuban migrants after Sunday's Angelus address. Pope Francis also reminds us about the importance of forgiveness. That was the primary message of his homily at Sunday's Mass celebrating the Holy Family. The Pope spoke to families making a pilgrimage to St. Peter's Basilica. Well, he entertained millions of us as a longtime member of the Harlem Globetrotters. Meadowlark Lemon has died. He was 83. His family says Lemon died Sunday in Scottsdale, Arizona. Inducted into the Basketball Hall of Fame in 2003, Lemon joined the Globetrotters in 1954. He played for 24 seasons. His knack for basketball trickery and on-the-court joking made him and the Globetrotters celebrities. Meadowlark Lemon was seen as a global ambassador. He later served as an ordained minister and a motivational speaker. The National Abortion Federation sues the Center for Medical Progress and David Daleiden. He is the man behind the undercover Planned Parenthood videos. Peter Breen, special counsel for the Thomas More Society, defending the Center for Medical Progress, and David Daleiden, joining us by Skype from Chicago. Merry Christmas and Happy New Year, Peter.
Hey, Merry Christmas.
Good to see you, and give us just an idea of the two motions that have been filed in this case.
Well, the main motion is a motion for preliminary injunction. The National Abortion Federation is trying to stop David Daleiden from publishing videos taken at the 2014 and 2015 National Abortion Federation meeting. This is the trade show for the entire abortion industry, hundreds and hundreds of abortion providers. And so there's a lot of material there that I can't disclose to you, but that David and the Center for Medical Progress would like to put out to the public for the public's viewing and information. The other motion is a motion for contempt because Congress subpoenaed that same video. It was provided to them. And the other side is saying that, well, we provided too much material, even though Congress said it wanted unedited, full video. So those are the two motions that are up right now and that are under advisement by the judge.
Peter, is there a precedent that applies to this case?
There are numerous precedents throughout American legal history that apply to protect undercover journalism like this and to protect the public's right to know when really difficult and even dangerous material needs to be disclosed. Number one that folks may remember are the Pentagon Papers case. Even though there was found to be a threat to national security from the release of those papers, the New York Times and other publications were still allowed to release them because of the First Amendment. And it's not just the First Amendment rights of the papers, but of the public. The American people have a right to know this information.
Did you expect this challenge? I mean, obviously, it looks like the other side is going to do whatever it takes to try to suppress this material.
Absolutely. I mean, they have gone through every avenue possible to them. They've also, their lawsuit is a massive racketeering conspiracy lawsuit. They're not just trying to stop these videos. They're actually trying to bankrupt David, anyone who dealt with David throughout his 3-year undercover journalism project, trying to bankrupt them, put them out of business, and really to take a chunk out of the pro-life movement. And we don't want them to be able to do that, certainly.
Are you at the Thomas More Society confident of a victory here?
Well, we believe that justice is going to prevail in the long term. As you know, one of our famous cases was Now v. Scheidler. It took 3 trips to the United States Supreme Court over 28 years in order to win a final victory in that case. We're hoping to get a little quicker result here, but at the same time, you never can predict how things will go in court.
Well, I know you'll persevere. Peter Breen with the Thomas More Society, Skyping with us from Chicago. Thanks again, Peter. God bless you.
God bless, Brian. Thank you.
Coming up, Pope Francis makes a Christmas appeal for dialogue and reconciliation to solve world conflicts. And best-selling author Eric Metaxas makes a strong case for God in today's culture. Thanks for joining us on this Christmas Monday, the 28th of December. I'm Brian Patrick with the EWTN News Nightly team. Pope Francis appeals for dialogue and reconciliation to solve world conflicts. Delivering his Christmas message from the central balcony of St. Peter's Basilica, Francis calls for resuming talks between Israel and the Palestinians. He also made a plea for an end to conflicts in Syria, Burundi, and Colombia. The Pope speaking before delivering his Urbi et Orbi blessing, that's Latin for to the city and to the world. Well, today we remember the Holy Innocents. This memorial honors the boys aged 2 and under ordered killed by King Herod in an attempt to kill the child Jesus. Mary Rice Hasson is director of the Catholic Women's Forum at the Ethics and Public Policy Center. This feast has been marked since the 5th century, but in today's society it is still very pertinent. Give us some examples of this kind of slaughter that's going on today.
Yeah, Brian, this is very much a story for today, not a story from the past. And if we think about what happened even back then, you think of the child Jesus nestled in his mother's arms and so safe. And then just a short time after that, we have the image of Herod's soldiers rampaging and tearing children from their mother's arms. And so what is it that goes on today? It's that same idea that the gift of life suddenly becomes a threat. And so we see that today in the threat to the unborn child through abortion. We see it with women who are trafficked. We see it with the elderly, where their lives are not appreciated. Our secular kings look at life as a threat.
So Herod felt threatened. He wanted to maintain control. How are the unborn, how are the elderly a threat to any of us?
You know, I think there's a little bit of Herod in each one of us in this sense, that we all have our turf. And the Lord Jesus comes and he says, let me be king of your life. Let me be Lord of your life. And so when something unexpected happens to any one of us, whether it's the mother who's not expecting a child or whether it's an elderly parent who needs extra care, we want to protect our turf. And we don't want the inconvenience. We want to keep our kingdom as it is without ceding that control to the real king.
Well, Jesus survives as a child, only to be crucified as an adult. What can we learn about God's plan in this story?
Looks paradoxical, doesn't
does,
it? Yeah,
yes.
but I think the real message is that life is a gift, and the meaning of life is love. And Jesus came to love as a baby, and he loved ultimately in that gift of life. And so for us, the message is open our hearts to that gift of love.
And how can we use this memorial to share with others around us this great gift of life, this precious gift?
I think part of it is speaking up in defense of the defenseless, but then also looking at our own lives and saying, Lord, have I let you in? And if not, open our hearts and be there, be present, give that gift of life and love to those who are in our lives.
The director of the Catholic Women's Forum at the Ethics and Public Policy Center, Mary Rice Hasson. Mary, you've been a great guest with us throughout 2015. Thank you for your contributions.
It's been great to be here.
We look forward to 2016 with you as well.
All righty, great. Thanks so much.
Also tonight, the debate between science and religion. We talked recently with a well-known author and radio host who says we should not apologize for our faith. Eric Metaxas, best-selling author, speaker, and radio host, joining us by Skype from New York. Eric, what does it mean to say that the death of God is greatly exaggerated?
Well, obviously it's a ripoff from Mark Twain, but I have to say that we live in a culture where the narrative in the media tends to be that somehow we're in a post-Christian age, somehow science has eclipsed faith. It's complete nonsense. I write about it in my book, Miracles, Soup to Nuts. I mean, I talk about how faith and science are not only compatible, but the more science we know, if we're honest, the more it actually leads us to faith in the God of the Bible. Now, you never hear that in the mainstream media. So I said, I've got to write a book about it. That's why I wrote the book, Miracles, and the Wall Street Journal recently profiled me and talked about it.
Yeah, you talk a lot about religious liberty. What is your goal in doing that?
Well, my goal is for America to remain America. We can never be strong and we can never be who we are as a nation unless we understand religious liberty. The founders understood it in their bones, so much so that they hardly expanded on it. But when you think about what they meant by religious liberty, you understand that we are at a time, for the first time in a long time, when it's in danger, when people are sneering at it and saying, if you have a biblical worldview, if you're a serious Catholic, you're a serious evangelical, you're out of the mainstream of America. That is not only nonsense, but it's dangerous to the republic, period, end of sentence. It's dangerous to everybody. It doesn't matter whether you're a Christian or an atheist. It's dangerous when people don't understand the strength of religious liberty as the underpinning of all of our freedoms.
So, Eric, how do you think we as individuals, especially those of us in the media, can bridge the gap between our faith and secular society?
Well, I think the point is that the point I'm making is there is no gap. When somebody says to me, oh, that's religious, I say nonsense. Reality is reality, truth is truth. There's no religious truth and secular truth, and that idea is itself a lie. We have to understand that if I'm talking about the God in whom I believe, I'm not talking about something I believe in. I'm talking about something I believe to be truth in the same way if I were talking about math or science. And I think we apologize too much for our faith. We have to say, look, it's either real or it's not, and that's why I write books about it. And in the Miracles book, most specifically, I try to help people understand this is real. And even if you're not sure, the evidence is overwhelming. And we have to stop feeling like it's just something I believe. I don't want to proselytize. I mean, wouldn't you want to proselytize about 1 + 1 = 2? Because it'll help people when they're building bridges. I mean, I kind of feel if you do it graciously, lovingly, winsomely, you'll get some people to understand it.
Don't stop speaking out about it. Eric Metaxas, thanks for joining us tonight.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Up next, a sampling of unique Christmas celebrations from across the world. And box office records are quickly shattered by Star Wars: The Force Awakens.
Merry Christmas to all Pakistan!
Christmas celebrations extend around the world. Christians in Pakistan gathered at Our Lady of Fatima Church in Islamabad. They are living with increased security there, having been the target of attacks. Around 60,000 Christians live in the Pakistani capital. Christians in Bangladesh experienced metal detectors as they entered their churches. They're concerned about the rise of Islamic radicalism. Still, they met Friday to pray and celebrate Christmas Mass together. Thank you for joining us this Monday evening of Christmas week. I'm Brian Patrick. From defending religious diversity in the military to religious sisters challenging the government's contraceptive mandate, 2015 was a year of significant religious freedom cases. Kristina Arriaga is Executive Director of the Becket Fund for Religious Liberty, representing many of those cases as well as EWTN. Let's talk about the Little Sisters first. What success did they experience and what can they expect for 2016?
Well, they've had tremendous success so far. Every time they have gone to the Supreme Court asking for protection from the $70 million in fines that are accruing against them, the Supreme Court has told the government the IRS cannot fine the sisters until they get their day in court. Unbelievably, the government lobbied last year for the Supreme Court not to hear the Little Sisters case. But the Supreme Court recently decided it will hear the case and the sisters get their day in court in March.
Another victory.
Yes.
Yeah. So it should be clear that the Little Sisters operate homes for the aged all over the world, but many here in this country, and they're staffed largely by lay people, although they're run by the sisters. So this affects them deeply, and as you mentioned, the deep fines that they could face. Give us an update on the religious diversity in the U.S. military.
Well, as you know, the military, understandably so, has very strict grooming requirements. One of them is that men have to be clean-shaven. However, they give exceptions to men who have certain medical conditions, or if the men are in the field and they're unable to shave. We've all seen the movies of the special forces and the beards. And a small group of patriotic Sikh Americans who, because of their religion, cannot shave their faces or cut their hair, have requested a religious exemption. And just a couple of weeks ago, the military told Simmer Singh, a West Point graduate, that he could keep his beard and his long hair and he can serve in the military. This is important because religious liberty is not the eccentric uncle of the human rights family. If you give an exemption for medical reasons, you should also give an exemption for religious reasons.
Also another case, we're expecting a ruling in 2016 on the case of a Native American tribe being denied their eagle feathers by the government.
This is one of my favorite cases that show government absurdity. Several years ago, the Department of Interior actually sent undercover agents to a private religious ceremony, to a powwow that was being officiated by Pastor Robert Soto. He is a Christian pastor, but he's also a Native American feather dancer. And the Department of Interior confiscated eagle feathers and threatened him with fines and a prison sentence. Now, the government allows big power companies to kill eagles, which, by the way, are no longer extinct, but it wanted to confiscate the feathers because they were being used in a religious ceremony. The case has been in court for some time. We won the latest round. The Becket Fund was able to show the courts how ridiculous the government position was. And this year, we expect that the government will indeed tell Pastor Soto that he owns those feathers.
The Becket Fund for Religious Liberty doing some difficult but very important work. Kristina Arriaga, thank you for all the time you spent with us in 2015. And I'm sure 2016 will bring us together again.
Thank you, Brian. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you. Well, Star Wars The Force Awakens breaks another box office record. Sunday, it earned $1 billion in global sales, faster than any film in history. The movie took 12 days to hit the $1 billion mark. That's one day earlier than Jurassic World. It also scored a record for Christmas Day box office sales on Friday. And the film won't open in China, the second largest film market in the world, until January 9th. So there's much more to come. Until tomorrow, for the EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Brian Patrick, and tonight we leave you with some moments from the Mass in St. Peter's Basilica celebrating the Jubilee of the Family. Good night, and God bless you.